You know, when we first proposed the design to the Omanis, because what happened was the cargo that came off the original ship was sold to Singapore. Singapore, thank God, really, bought the whole thing. So it's all together. When we first proposed the design to the Omanis, because what happened was that Singapore decided they were going to display this cargo, and then they thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have a boat along with it, sort of a replica. Anyway, the report of the archaeologists said something about similarity to Omani boats, and so the Singaporeans approached the Omanis and said, you want to be involved in this? And I was working for the cultural affairs advisor to His Majesty then. The project came to him and he said, do you think this is a good idea? And I said, from my point of view, as a marine archaeologist, it's a fantastic idea. He said, okay, make me a budget, which I went away and did, and gave it to him. And he took a glance at the bottom line and threw it back at me and said, it's not enough. I said, I'm not used to this. You know, being in archaeology, we're always cutting.
The other way around.
And it was expanded twice, actually. And the second time I asked him, I said, Your Excellency, this boat is going to Singapore. It's going to be there, stay there. No one's going to see it in Oman. Why do you want to invest all this money? And he said, I don't really care about the floating boat that much. He said, but this project, I wanted to inspire young Omanis. I want to reacquaint them with their heritage. I want award-winning films. I want books. He said, but most of all, I want this documented. He's, as he said, down to the last nail. And I said, Your Excellency, there are no nails in this ship. He said, you know what I mean. Yes, okay. In this particular ship, we've got, think about this, I believe 37,000 holes in the ship in order to stitch it together. We used more than 120 kilometers of rope to sew it together. It's just over 18 meters long, a bit over 6.5 wide. It displaces 55 tons in the condition you see here. The hull itself weighs about 20 tons, and the rest is ballast and stores and that kind of thing. There were 2 square sails. Well, they were actually trapezoids. We know, in fact, exactly how many holes were drilled in that ship. We know who did the stitching. The men did it in pairs. We know which sections they sewed. We know how long it took them. We know the weight of every piece of wood that went into that ship that was able to be weighed. We know its weight, its center of gravity, its exact. Everything was measured absolutely perfectly. So it's really, really finely documented. Film, drawings, notes, photographs. The hull timber, this stuff we got from West Africa. The original beams that were left on the site were identified as teak, so all these are teak. The ancient ships did not have decks, but we have put a deck on this for safety purposes. The ship was excavated, the bow was excavated, but the stern was locked in concretion of coral, which we couldn't, the excavators could not excavate there, so we don't know what the stern of the original is like. The bow is almost spot on perfect. We had flanking of the original ship preserved on one side up to this level. We don't know how high it went above that, but we think this is about right. These are all based on the original measurements. Up here in the bow, that angle of the stem is exactly as the original was. We don't know, obviously, what the sort of decoration was here or anything like that, but certainly from there on down, we're pretty confident it's right. We don't know how many masts the original ship had. It could have had 1, it could have had 2, unlikely to have 3. But the reason we made 2, well, there are a number of reasons. One of them was we could distribute the compression forces of the masts into 2 rather than have it concentrated on 1 and all that pressure on 1. The other reason was we could put a little more sail area on 2 masts than we can with 1. And we had more flexibility in balancing the hull against the sails and that kind of thing. With those two, we could play around with that. I said this as two trapezoidal, almost square sails, but actually the one that's fitted on the mizzenmast now is more V-shaped. And it's interesting, we just got to speculating about using a V-shaped sail, because there's iconography from about the 11th century that shows some sails that appear to be V-shaped, and I always assumed that they were just gathered in at the bottom. But then we just started to think about this a bit. I said, maybe they were actually that shape, and let's try one. So on the last leg, they tried this one. Fantastic. It works really well. They can set it closer to the wind. It's much easier to handle, and they were really, really happy with that. Whereas the ship is really quite, I think, authentic 9th century. We do have modern equipment on board. We've got 3 life rafts. We have, of course, a little rubber boat with an engine. We've got, you'll see up there, some electronic gear, and up there as well, wind indicator, wind speed. That little tube up there is a camera, a film camera, movie camera. We've got broadband, fleet broadband for communicating on the net. We've got an AIS system, automatic identification system, that sends a signal to every ship in the vicinity that tells us tells them this is a sailing ship with no engine. Stay away, and it tells us where they are. We've got active radar reflector, that little white tube with the red writing on it sends out a signal to a radar. When it gets pinged by a radar, it sends a signal back. So we've got that. We've got automatic electric bilge pumps. We've also got manual bilge pumps. So it's easier to it's actually easier to pump this thing out than it would have been the old ship where they had to bail. They didn't have pumps then. We know that because we see iconography of people bailing those ships.